He hit his pregnant wife. Seconds later, the Mafia boss arrived as his men surrounded the mansion. Marble floor, cold beneath her knees, blood in her mouth where her own teeth caught the inside of her cheek. 7 months pregnant, one hand pressed instinctively over her belly. 28-year-old Sophia Whitmore looked up at the man who'd just struck her hard enough to send her to the ground. Marcus stood over her, knuckles still stinging. He had no idea what he'd just done. He had no idea his wife's real name wasn't Whitmore at all. He had no idea that the cheap prepaid phone hidden in her nightstand drawer was about to summon the single most feared man on the entire eastern seaboard. 40 minutes later, 6 black SUVs rolled down his driveway with their headlights off. Subscribe right now and drop your city in the comments, because what happens next is going to leave you speechless. Like, share, notifications on. You are not ready for this story. Rain had been falling across Greenwich, Connecticut since early afternoon, the specific cold, relentless kind that turned the Whitmore estate's long private driveway into a river of black water. 12-foot hedgerows shielded the property from the road, the kind of luxurious concealment that made passing cars slow down just to catch a glimpse of what wealth like this actually looked like from the outside. Inside the kitchen, Sophia stood at the marble island with both hands wrapped around a mug of tea she hadn't touched in 20 minutes. She wasn't listening to the rain. She was listening for tires on the driveway, for the specific weight of Marcus's car door slamming shut, for the sharp, deliberate click of his shoes against the front steps. 3 years of marriage had taught her exactly what those sounds meant. She pressed one hand flat against her abdomen, 7 months along, the baby shifting slowly beneath her ribs. She breathed the way a therapist she'd seen for exactly 2 sessions had taught her, before Marcus found the receipt and made certain she never went back. Headlights swept across the kitchen window. Sophia set down her mug, turned toward the sink, and stood with her back to the door. She'd learned, across 3 careful years, that appearing to wait irritated him. Appearing not to care irritated him equally. There was no posture, no expression, no tone of voice guaranteed safe. But there were degrees of danger, and she'd learned to navigate them the way a person learns to live inside a house with a broken step. The front door opened hard. Keys hit the console table. A long exhale. Sophia turned around. Marcus Whitmore was 35, tall, broad-shouldered, silver already threading through dark hair he kept impeccably cut. His charcoal suit was soaked through at the shoulders, his expression rigid with the specific controlled fury she recognized instantly, pressure building beneath ice. There's soup on the stove. Her voice stayed steady. She'd become genuinely skilled at that. He walked past her without acknowledgement, poured 2 fingers of whiskey, drank half of it in one motion. Hennessy pulled out. His voice carried flat, devastating finality. She knew exactly what that meant. A development deal he'd spent the better part of a year building toward collapsed entirely. I'm sorry. Are you? It wasn't a question. What could you possibly do, Kate? What exactly do you bring to any of this that's remotely useful? He set down the glass, not gently. I've been carrying this marriage, this household, everything, for 3 years. And the one time I need things to go right, I come home to you looking at me like a frightened animal. I'm not frightened. You should be. He moved. She'd learned to watch for exactly this shift, controlled fury tipping into something else entirely, fast enough that people who'd never experienced it wouldn't believe how quickly the distance between them collapsed. Richard, stop. Stop what? I'm in my own kitchen, my own house. His hand closed around her upper arm, hard enough to hold her in place, not quite hard enough to leave marks. Still, he was still practiced enough for that. I need you to understand what you've cost me. You're hurting me. Quiet. I'm talking. You're going to hurt the baby. Something flickered across his face. For one devastating second, she thought it might actually work. His phone buzzed against his jacket. He glanced down, and whatever appeared on that screen destroyed the last of his restraint completely. He shoved her with both hands. She stumbled backward, caught the counter's edge with the back of her arm, and then his open palm connected with the right side of her face hard enough to snap her head sideways, hard enough that her vision whited out for a full second. Her knees hit marble. "Get up." His voice had gone cold, and cold was, in some specific way, worse than hot. "You look ridiculous down there." Sophia looked up at him from the floor, one hand pressed against her swelling cheek, the other flat against her belly, and understood with sudden, absolute clarity that something inside her had finally, completely broken. Not her spirit. Something considerably more dangerous. "I'm going upstairs." Her voice carried the same steady tone, the same volume, and something in that exact repetition made Marcus take an involuntary step backward. She walked past him, through the kitchen, up the curved staircase, feeling his eyes on her back the entire way. She didn't turn around. The master bedroom door closed behind her. She stood in the dark with her forehead against the wood for 30 full seconds, breathing herself back under control. Then she crossed to the nightstand, opened the drawer, reached past the chapstick and the half-finished paperback, and found what she'd hidden there every single night for 3 months. A cheap prepaid phone, purchased with cash at a gas station in Stamford. 40% battery, exactly where she'd left it. One contact saved. No name, just an international prefix she'd memorized at an age when most children were still learning multiplication tables. 240-pound night shift waitress with aching ankles and greasy apron strings. Doesn't expect a billionaire mob boss. She said it in English, and then, without meaning to, switched entirely into the language of her childhood, 4 rapid sentences carrying everything he needed to understand. 3 seconds of silence stretched across the line. "Where is he now?" "Downstairs." "Is the gate code still the same one you sent?" "Yes." "Go to the east wing, the room at the end of the hall. Stay there. Do not open the door for anyone who does not say the name." "What name?" "Sunrise." She remembered. She'd been 7 years old when she learned it. The word that meant the family was coming, and you were safe. "How long?" "We are already in Connecticut." The line went dead. Sophia sat with the phone in her lap, eyes closed, breathing slow, the baby turning again beneath her ribs. She pressed her palm flat against the movement and whispered, in Russian, the exact words her mother once whispered to her. "We are all right. We are going to be all right now." She stood, crossed to the window, watched the rain, watched the red blink of the security light at the end of the driveway. Then she turned and walked toward the east wing, toward the room at the end of the hall, toward whatever her father's arrival was about to unleash on a man who had absolutely no idea what he'd actually married 3 years ago. Anton's voice carried genuine, controlled urgency the instant Ivy's broken words registered fully, his composed authority shifting instantly from surprise into absolute focus. "Tell me exactly what happened, right now." Her explanation poured out through barely controlled tears, 6 years of maintained pride, finally collapsing entirely as she described 14 devastating months of escalating danger, the specific violence that had culminated tonight, her hand still pressed against her swelling cheek.
"He hit me, in front of the credenza."
"I fell, and I caught myself. But Papa, I'm 8 months pregnant, and I didn't know what else to do." Anton's silence carried genuine, devastating weight, his mind processing 6 years of respected distance colliding directly against the specific horror of understanding his daughter had endured this alone. "You should have called me the very first time," he raised his voice. His voice carried quiet, controlled anguish beneath its authority. "I would have. I should have." Her voice broke further. "I wanted to prove I could build something without needing your protection. I didn't want to admit I'd failed." Anton's response carried genuine, devastating conviction. "You didn't fail anything. You survived 14 months alone that you never should have had to survive at all. His voice sharpened with immediate command. Give me the address. I'm coming tonight. Marcus Delgado, Anton's longtime lieutenant, entered his office within minutes of Anton's urgent summons, his own controlled composure carrying genuine alarm as he processed his boss's uncharacteristic urgency. We move immediately. Full security detail. 6 vehicles. Anton's voice carried absolute, unshakable command. My daughter needs us tonight. Marcus's expression carried genuine shock. 6 years of silence between Anton and his estranged daughter, having become something of an unspoken wound within the organization, nobody dared mention directly. Understood. I'll have everything ready within 20 minutes. As Anton's convoy assembled with devastating speed, Marcus initiated his own parallel investigation, understanding instinctively that comprehensive information would matter considerably before they arrived at whatever situation awaited them. His methodical review of Preston Ashford's background began with basic financial records, the kind of routine due diligence Anton's organization performed automatically whenever family connections intersected with outside threats. What Marcus discovered within the first hour carried devastating, unexpected weight. Boss, you need to see this before we arrive. His voice carried genuine, urgent concern as he approached Anton inside the lead SUV, tablet already displaying comprehensive financial documentation. Ashford's venture capital firm has been hemorrhaging money for over a year. Bad investments, considerable debt, the kind of collapse that typically ends in bankruptcy within months. Anton's controlled expression sharpened immediately. What does that have to do with my daughter? Marcus's voice carried careful, devastating precision. The timeline, sir. His firm's first major collapse happened roughly 2.5 years ago. His courtship of Ivy began within weeks of that exact crisis. Anton went completely still, genuine, devastating recognition building behind his controlled expression as implications crystallized. You're suggesting he targeted her deliberately. Marcus's response carried genuine, careful confirmation. I'm suggesting that timing carries considerable suspicion. I need more time to confirm exactly what he believed he was marrying into. Ivy, riding in the second vehicle with 2 of Anton's most trusted security personnel, absorbed this information through the shared communication channel with genuine, crashing shock. He married me for money he thought I still had access to. Her voice carried devastating, disbelieving horror. I told him repeatedly I was estranged from my family. I told him I had absolutely no access to any wealth beyond what I earned myself. One of her security escorts, a woman named Elena who'd worked for Anton's organization for over a decade, offered careful, measured observation. Men like him don't always believe estrangement is permanent. He may have calculated that marriage would eventually provide access regardless of your current circumstances. Ivy's hands curled into fists, genuine fury building beneath her devastating shock. 2 years. 2 years of believing he genuinely loved me, and the entire time he was simply waiting for financial access that never actually existed. Back at the Ashford estate, Preston remained in his study working through his 3rd whiskey, entirely unaware of the convoy currently racing toward his home. His phone buzzed repeatedly with increasingly panicked messages from his business partners. Hendricks pulled out. He heard about the debt structure. We're finished if we don't secure alternative financing within the week. Preston's hands trembled slightly as he read the message, genuine desperate panic building beneath his earlier controlled fury. His entire carefully constructed reputation, his considerable social standing, everything he'd built across years of calculated performance, all of it collapsing simultaneously. He poured himself a 4th whiskey, his mind racing through increasingly desperate financial options, when something outside his study window caught his attention. The estate's exterior security lights, normally illuminating the perimeter fence line with steady, reassuring consistency, began failing in sequence, section by section going dark, despite the storm rolling in outside. Preston frowned, setting down his glass, crossing to the window with genuine, mounting confusion. Rain streaked the glass, distorting his view of the darkened grounds beyond. He pressed closer, straining to understand exactly what he was looking at. Then he saw them, black shapes materializing along his driveway, moving with slow, deliberate precision, headlights extinguished despite the storm's darkness. He counted 1, 2, 3. By the time he reached 6, his hands had begun trembling, his mind struggling to process information it had absolutely no existing framework for understanding. 6 vehicles. His breath came shallow, genuine visceral terror, finally replacing his earlier desperate financial panic entirely. Something primal registered before conscious thought fully caught up, an instinctive understanding that whatever approached his home carried considerably more danger than any business rival or angry investor he'd ever anticipated facing throughout his entire calculated, carefully performed adult life. Preston's frantic retreat from the study window carried genuine, mounting panic, his hands fumbling toward the estate's hidden security panel, his mind racing through emergency protocols he'd never once genuinely believed he'd need. The panel remained dark, unresponsive to his trembling fingers. Someone had already disabled it. He heard his own front door open, no alarm triggering, a specific impossibility that finally, completely shattered whatever composure remained beneath his desperate confusion. He stumbled from his study into the main hallway, finding 4 men already positioned throughout his foyer with practiced, silent efficiency, their expressions carrying none of the negotiable authority he desperately hoped might still remain available. "This is my house. You have no right to." The nearest man's response carried flat, absolute finality. "Sit down, Mr. Ashford. This conversation isn't going to unfold the way you're imagining." Preston's attempted assertion of authority collapsed entirely, his legs carrying him mechanically toward the nearest chair without further protest. The front door opened again, and Preston's blood ran cold as a man in his late 50s stepped through, dark overcoat soaked from the storm outside, his controlled presence radiating absolute authority that made every other man in the room instinctively straighten. Anton Reyes crossed the foyer with unhurried, devastating purpose, his eyes finding his daughter first as she emerged from the second vehicle behind him, genuine tenderness crossing his composed features despite everything. Ivy stepped through the door, and Anton's controlled fury finally broke through completely, his hands finding her face gently, genuine devastation crossing his expression as he processed her swollen cheek. "I'm here now. I'm sorry it took 14 months. His voice broke slightly. Ivy's own composure finally shattered, 6 years of maintained distance collapsing entirely as she folded into her father's embrace, genuine relief and devastating grief tangling together completely. Preston watched this reunion with genuine, crashing horror, understanding with sudden, devastating clarity exactly who had just walked through his front door. That's not possible. Your last name is Marlowe." Anton's controlled gaze finally shifted toward Preston, genuine, devastating contempt crossing his expression. "My daughter changed her name specifically to build a life away from my world. A life you apparently believed connected to considerable wealth, despite understanding she'd been estranged from her family for years." Marcus stepped forward, tablet still displaying comprehensive financial documentation, his voice carrying genuine, professional precision. "We've confirmed the timeline, sir." Preston's firm collapsed roughly 2.5 years ago. His courtship of Ivy began within weeks of that exact financial crisis. Anton's controlled fury sharpened into something considerably more devastating. "You didn't simply fall in love with my daughter, did you, Mr. Ashford?" His voice carried quiet, absolute certainty. You calculated her value the moment you discovered her connection to my organization. Preston's desperate justification carried genuine, escalating panic. That's not. I genuinely cared about her. The financial situation was simply what you married her to solve. Anton's interruption carried devastating finality. Ivy's own devastating processing crossed her exhausted features, 2 years of marriage reframing itself entirely around calculated manipulation rather than genuine connection. You never loved me. You loved what you thought I could give you. Her voice carried raw, devastating conviction. Preston's silence confirmed everything more completely than any words could have managed. Marcus's continued investigation deepened throughout the following hour. Comprehensive documentation revealing exactly how thoroughly Preston had researched Ivy's background before their initial meeting, evidence suggesting his entire courtship had been calculated performance from its very first conversation. But sir, there's something else. Marcus's voice carried genuine, growing concern. Preston's research into Ivy's identity was considerably too specific for simple public records investigation. He knew details about her legal name change, her exact location, information that should have been genuinely difficult to trace after 6 years of careful anonymity. Anton's controlled expression sharpened with immediate, devastating alarm. You're suggesting someone provided that information directly? Marcus's response carried careful, professional precision. I'm suggesting we need to understand exactly how Preston originally identified Ivy, despite her legal name change and years of maintained distance. Public records alone shouldn't have provided this level of specific detail. Ivy's own genuine shock crossed her features as this implication settled. Someone inside your organization helped him find me. Anton's expression carried genuine, devastating fury building beneath his controlled composure. If that's true, this betrayal extends considerably beyond Preston's calculated cruelty alone. Detective Sarah Vance arrived at the estate within the hour, summoned through official channels once Anton's people confirmed the domestic violence pattern required legitimate legal documentation alongside whatever organizational consequence he intended to deliver personally. I've been trying to build a case against Preston Ashford for months. Her voice carried genuine, frustrated conviction as she reviewed the situation unfolding around her. Neighbors reported disturbances repeatedly. Every previous attempt stalled because Ivy was too frightened to provide comprehensive testimony. Ivy's voice carried genuine, hard-won determination, despite everything. I'll testify now. Comprehensively, whatever it takes to ensure he faces genuine consequence. Sarah's expression carried genuine, professional satisfaction. With documented evidence of tonight's assault, combined with your comprehensive testimony about the pattern of abuse, we finally have exactly what's needed to ensure prosecution succeeds. Marcus's phone buzzed urgently, his expression shifting instantly from focused investigation into sharp, controlled alarm as he reviewed incoming information. Sir, I found it. The leak. His voice carried genuine, devastating weight. Ricardo Salinas. He's had access to considerable internal records for over a decade, and his gambling debts have grown substantial enough that financial desperation would explain exactly why he might have sold information he swore absolute loyalty to protect. Anton went completely still, genuine, devastating recognition crossing his controlled expression. Ricardo has been with this organization for 15 years. He was at Ivy's christening. His voice carried quiet, absolute finality. Confirm everything immediately. If he's responsible for delivering my daughter directly into this exact danger, he'll answer for it considerably more comprehensively than Preston ever will. Anton's controlled fury crystallized into methodical, absolute action, his voice carrying devastating authority as he processed the full scope of Ricardo's betrayal. Marcus, confirm the evidence comprehensively before we move against him directly. I want no ambiguity when this reckoning arrives. Marcus's investigation deepened throughout the following hours, financial records and communication patterns assembling into comprehensive, undeniable proof that Ricardo had sold Ivy's identity and location to a private investigator Preston had hired 18 months earlier, the exact transaction timed precisely with Preston's desperate search for financial salvation. 15 years of trusted loyalty, sir. Marcus's voice carried genuine, devastating weight as he presented the final documentation, and he sold your daughter's safety for considerably less money than his gambling debts actually required. Anton's controlled expression carried absolute, quiet finality. Then he'll understand exactly what 15 years of betrayed trust actually costs. Ivy's own agency emerged fully throughout the unfolding crisis. Her genuine courage in confronting both her husband's calculated betrayal and the deeper organizational treachery that enabled it becoming instrumental as comprehensive evidence assembled against everyone responsible. I want to be present when you confront Ricardo. Her voice carried steady, unwavering conviction despite everything. I need to understand exactly how deeply this betrayal actually reached. Anton studied his daughter carefully, genuine respect building beneath his controlled devastation. You've earned that right. Detective Vance's federal authority converged with Anton's own organizational justice throughout the following days. Comprehensive evidence ensuring Preston faced genuine legal prosecution for his documented pattern of domestic violence. Charges considerably strengthened by tonight's assault, witnessed and documented by multiple credible parties. Preston's own desperate attempt to leverage remaining social connections and legal resources collapsed entirely against evidence too extensive for any maneuvering to minimize. His carefully constructed public reputation and his already collapsing business facing simultaneous, permanent ruin. You can't do this to me. Preston's voice carried genuine, desperate panic as federal agents arrived to formalize his arrest. I have considerable connections, considerable resources. Anton's controlled response carried devastating finality. You had considerable resources. Tonight, you have exactly what your actions actually earned you. Ricardo's own confrontation unfolded with considerably more brutal organizational finality. His 15 years of betrayed loyalty answered through consequence that closed an entire devastating chapter of internal treachery within Anton's trusted circle. Weeks passed following that devastating night, Preston facing comprehensive federal prosecution alongside the specific organizational consequence Anton's world demanded, evidence too extensive for any legal maneuvering to minimize his eventual sentencing. Ivy settled safely within her father's protection throughout those following weeks, her physical injuries healing under genuine medical care, her understanding of exactly why she'd maintained 6 years of silence, finally, fully processed alongside genuine relief that reaching out hadn't unleashed uncontrollable chaos, but rather the specific, comprehensive protection her father had always intended to remain available. I should have called you the first time he raised his hand. Her voice carried genuine, unguarded reflection during a quiet conversation with Anton, weeks after Preston's arrest. I spent 14 months believing reaching out meant admitting I'd failed at building something independent. Anton's expression carried genuine, complicated tenderness. I let you leave at 20 because I understood you needed distance from the violence that shaped your childhood. His voice carried quiet, devastating honesty. I never once anticipated that distance would mean you'd endure a different, more sophisticated version of exactly that same danger, completely alone. Ivy's hand found his, genuine warmth replacing the exhausted vigilance that had defined 2 devastating years of marriage. I understand now. Independence doesn't mean facing everything alone. It means choosing who genuinely protects you, rather than who simply performs protection. Their relationship rebuilt itself throughout those following weeks, honest communication replacing the careful protective distance both of them had maintained for 6 devastating years. Anton learning to check in regularly, rather than simply respecting Ivy's chosen independence without verification. Ivy learning that accepting her father's protection didn't require sacrificing the genuine independence she'd worked so carefully to build. Ricardo's exposure sent considerable ripples throughout Anton's organization, his 15 years of betrayed trust becoming a cautionary reminder of exactly how vulnerable even the most established loyalty could become under sufficient financial desperation. Sophia's own transformation continued unfolding throughout her recovery, her willingness to testify comprehensively against Preston becoming, in retrospect, the exact catalyst that had exposed and permanently dismantled the calculated deception that had nearly cost her everything. Months later, an ordinary evening settled over Anton's estate, considerably different from the tension that had once defined Preston's mansion. Ivy, standing in a quiet nursery with her newborn son, cradled against her chest. Anton entered the room slowly, his controlled authority carrying none of the terrifying presence the world understood him to possess. Simply the specific, quiet tenderness of a grandfather meeting his grandson for the first time. "May I hold him?" His voice carried genuine, unguarded warmth. Ivy's answering smile carried genuine, hard-won peace as she placed her son carefully into her father's arms. Anton studied the small, sleeping face with genuine, overwhelmed emotion, his considerable authority momentarily forgotten entirely as he processed the specific, quiet miracle of holding his grandson for the first time. "He has your mother's eyes." His voice carried quiet, devastating tenderness. Ivy's own eyes filled with genuine emotion as she watched her father hold her son with careful, unguarded love. "I named him Anton, after you." Anton's controlled composure finally broke completely, genuine tears crossing his weathered features as he processed the specific weight of that gesture. "I'm not certain I deserve that honor." His voice carried genuine, absolute humility. Ivy settled beside him, watching her father hold her son in the quiet nursery, genuine peace replacing the exhausting vigilance that had defined 2 devastating years of her previous life entirely. "You deserve it, because you came the moment I finally called." Her voice carried genuine, quiet reflection. That's exactly what protection actually means. Dimitri's expression carried genuine, unwavering warmth as he looked up from his grandson toward his daughter. "Then I'll spend every remaining day making certain you never once doubt that protection remains available again." The nursery around them carried none of the danger and controlled violence that had once defined Ivy's understanding of family entirely, filled instead with genuine warmth, restored trust, and the specific, quiet miracle of a family finally, comprehensively whole. If this story kept you holding your breath from that shattered porcelain to this final quiet nursery, if it reminded you that real protection sometimes arrives the moment we finally ask for it, subscribe right now because we are not finished. Share this with someone who needs it today. Like this video, drop your city below, and turn on notifications because the next story is already loaded and you are not ready for what's coming.